Artificial intelligence is moving faster than most governments know how to handle, but Massachusetts is trying to get ahead of it. The Healy administration has been pushing AI integration across state agencies, from healthcare to transportation to education, and has been building partnerships with universities and private companies to do it. So, what does that mean for how state government works, who has access to your data, and whether public employees have any say in the tools they're required to use? I'm Jennifer Smith, and this is the Codcast, CommonWealth Beacon's podcast about policy and civic life here in Massachusetts. If you enjoyed this episode or want to dive into our archive on AI, by the way, we'll have some other episodes linked in the show notes. Those include subjects like the state's AI hub, how AI is touching politics and journalism in the state, and what researchers mean when they worry about intellectual or moral erosion from overuse of these sorts of tools. But my guest today is Jason Snyder, the Commonwealth Secretary of Technology. And we're talking about what it means that a new AI assistant will be rolled out across Massachusetts. Because if every state agency has the option to use AI to help sort through Bay Staters' data, that means all of the data has to be available to the AI assistant. So that's taxpayer data, medical data, RMV data, homeownership and rental information. So what does that look like in practice? How will it be used? Let's get into it. Secretary Snyder, welcome.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being here.
So let's start with a baseline. We've talked about AI plenty here on the Codcast, but when we talk about AI integration in Massachusetts state government, how widespread is it right now and where is it most concentrated?
So 2024, Gen AI becomes like the thing. And so what we did in 2024 was we broke up into three different focus areas, a strategy focus, a education training focus, and a policy focus. And so starting back then, and this will play into where we are today, our strategy was built through the AI task force, which I can talk about. Our education training, we partnered closely with higher ed institutions, and we continue to. And we continue to build a training program across all of Massachusetts. And then early on, we recognized the guardrails that needed to be in place for any AI solution for Massachusetts. So those foundationally led to where we are today. At this point, we are seeing, and everybody's seeing this, you're seeing AI in many, many, many applications, but we are actively rolling out an AI assistant for every employee of the Commonwealth.
So I guess thinking about sort of that big picture question now while we have a moment, when I had talked to AI Hub Director Sabrina Mansour on the Codcast a little while ago, it was still kind of in formation. There was still kind of some fiddling around what that'll look like. But the thing that I'm interested in is the question of what do we mean by AI these days? Because one of the things that came up in my conversation with Sabrina was, it's kind of being tacked on to everything. So it can kind of be a little bit hard for people to understand, is it, a glorified autocomplete, or are we talking about something closer to Clippy? Is it, where in the great since the 90s landscape are we when you think about the AI tools that the state is interested in?
Sure. So you're right, AI is being found everywhere. We originally were going to do a survey of all the applications that used AI. We very quickly realized it would just be 100% of all the applications, and so less value there. We're really interested in generative AI that is being used to help us do our jobs, to help us roll out different things for Massachusetts, things that actually improve the way we can deliver services for Massachusetts versus some kind of broad robot type thing.
Gotcha. And you talked a little bit about the AI task force, which we can get into a bit. I guess the more specific question is sort of the administration, the Healy administration has been fairly aggressive on this, kind of compared to some other states. So what is the underlying philosophy there? Is it about efficiency? Is it about economic competitiveness? Both and something else? What's the motivating theory here?
I think it starts with this idea that AI is here. It's not going away. There's no technologies that come in and then disappear. And so there's the recognition that with any new technology, what do you do with it? And in Massachusetts, I think what we're looking at first and foremost is training everybody in its use. It's an educational focus. It's this idea that the way that We really focus on building our workforce is through training our workforce in AI. And so it really does uh, think it starts with the training focus, and then it builds into this, how do we help staff do their work? And I think foundationally, that's what we're looking at. How do we deliver services for the Commonwealth better? And we see examples of where AI can really help. Um, we in all cases, and this is true of all states, we're working under very restricted budgets. And so under these restricted budgets, the demand for services has never been higher. And so are there ways that we can use an AI solution to help deliver services in a better way?
And you say training, and of course there's two ways to think of that. There's the training for the employees who are using it, but then there's also what these tools are being trained on. There's kind of that data component, there's the usage component. They need data to function, and state government holds an enormous amount of personal data on residents, students, workers, people who access our healthcare system. So on sort of a first level basis here, how has the Healy administration, how has Massachusetts been dealing with the fact that there's a lot of pretty sensitive data that could be implicated in these systems?
Great question. So foundationally, from the get-go, when we talked about the policy and the guardrails, the very first guardrail we put in place was we built a sandbox, this idea of a private area where people can do AI testing and not have their data train models. And that's true of the AI assistant as well. Our AI solution will not train the ChatGPT OpenAI model. We'll get the benefit of updated models on a regular basis, but none of our data will leave our state. None of our data will leave our local solution. Your data is safe. And actually, as an individual, your data is safe. As a manager, if one of my employees is using AI, I don't have access to their queries and prompts. They get to keep that and retain that personally.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious about this. So, in the context of my job, I try not to use AI as much as possible because I'm a writer, so I'm exercising my brain in that way. But one of the questions that I have on the data privacy front is sort of, how can we sort of be sure? Is it a guarantee kind of from OpenAI? Is it a guarantee from whatever partnerships there are? Because since the week started, it's kind of an odd week for AI data security in that Anthropic, which runs Claude, basically put its code out by accident into the universe. So it wasn't people's personal data, but basically kind of the mechanics of how it worked have been made a bit more visible than they were before. So I think there can be a sort of anxiety around, where is this being stored? And if there is human error, where could that data go?
So first, let's start contractually. The OpenAI is obligated to ensure that our data remains in Massachusetts. So absolutely, from a contractual basis, there's no question about it. Second, we perform a security architecture test on a regular basis where we're actively, reviewing the architecture that we have in place to ensure that that architecture matches that contractual language. And we are actively working with OpenAI. We have a series of pilot tests that we're doing for every rollout. So we're validating the data remains secure, the data remains private. We actually we will have a separate workspace, a regulated workspace for HIPAA data. So OpenAI, their ChatGPT product is approved by the federal government for use for HIPAA data. And so we will have a regulated workspace for our health and human services agencies that use regulated HIPAA data, and then another one for those that don't have those obligations.
Gotcha. And help me out a little bit on a 101 level for people who aren't really familiar with the difference between kind of training the models and using the models to navigate kind of their normal workflows here. So when we talk about, a closed sandbox, including data that might be sensitive, how what is the distinction essentially between your data is going in there and it is learning from your data? It is training from what you put in, because obviously I guess why I ask is, what's the point of an AI assistant that can't access all of that sensitive data?
Yeah, yeah. No, it's the information you put in remains in your personal little area, and it can learn from that data locally. So, like, it can learn, I always ask a question a certain way, and it can learn from that. But the data is not leaving, and the data is not going anywhere. And the model, the LLM itself, that's the thing that's being trained by data everywhere, but from Massachusetts. And so those models are updated on a regular basis. They're constantly matured, and those models come in, and they're loaded on a regular basis. And at that point, you get the benefits of what everybody else is doing, but our data remains safe and secure.
So, on a practical level, what is this AI assistant supposed to be doing? How would someone use it on a regular basis inside state government?
So it starts with this idea that all of our previous efforts were essentially top-down efforts. I briefly mentioned the training and the higher ed partnerships. We started with partnerships with two separate higher ed institutions, Northeastern and UMass Amherst. In both cases, we brought in a cohort of students. We had 12 students in the first cohort, for example. We assigned them top down to different projects, different use cases across different agencies within the Commonwealth, and they did an incredible job. We had actually an example of something they did, for an aside, was they worked with Mass Highway, and Mass Highway on a regular basis, they're designing road things like bridges and things like that. And each engineer would spend 2 to 3 weeks of effort for any kind of new project. I need to build a bridge, looking for all the standards associated with building a bridge. These students, they created an AI app that very quickly goes through all the standards. And you can say, I want to build a bridge. What standards do I need? It'll respond immediately with those standards and the references for those standards, so a person can actually validate their work. And so, exciting news, and again, incredible work, incredible effort. But in all cases, the work that was being done was top down. What we're doing with this rollout is we're saying, hey, we're democratizing innovation across Massachusetts. We're saying, random person X, do you have any ideas for how we can use this? We've just met with some of the economic development teams, and they had examples of, random staff doing all kinds of things to help with making their development easier. We have examples of different people working on ways to improve the way they're writing notes. We have people thinking of ways to help them write emails more effectively. And all of this starts with this idea of training. So we give them the foundational training, and then we have different tiers of training that they can advance as far as they want to go. And then they come up with different ideas, new things that they can use.
And one of the things that kind of jumped out to me there was this idea of agency staff, state employees could kind of use this or advance with it as much as they want to. So tell me a little bit, this AI assistant, is it something that's optional? Is it something that people can make use of? Is it something that they could opt out of? What's the idea when we're talking about what it means to integrate it across state government?
So participation is entirely voluntary. There's no forcing, there's no like mandatory tool usage or anything like that. This is something that we're offering this to everybody. We're offering the training, the many, many tiers of training for everybody. So you can drive at your own pace. You can dive into it at your own pace. I have had some staff reach out to me who have been very excited and were sharing different ideas. They want, can I do this? Can I do that? Can I do this? Can I do that? And with all kinds of excitement. And I've had other staff who are like, I don't want any part of this. And I think that's what's great about this program. Both of them will be happy. It's like, great, don't use it. And then someone else, great, use it and come up with great ideas. Good. So it is all about getting it out there for people to use and learn from.
I'm also really fascinated, kind of, I'm not going to have you weigh in on specific legislation because that's not really your turf, obviously, separate territory there. But there's been a lot of discussion around, to what extent things should be sort of disclosed as using AI or being kind of produced by AI. So to what extent should people sort of be assuming that interactions with state government now are kind of AI informed? Should there be disclosures on that? Is that all sort of being worked out? I guess I'm just kind of curious about to what extent it feels important to signal that this is kind of a mediated experience or interaction now.
In all cases within Massachusetts, we have a human at the helm approach to using AI. So in every case, there will be a human reviewing it, there'll be a human interacting with it prior to any public distribution of it. So AI may be used by somebody to help create it or maybe create a framework for it, but the actual usage of it will always be controlled by that person. And so that's essential because whatever is being posted, whatever is being provided, ultimately has a person who's responsible for it, not AI.
And you mentioned, of course, kind of the educational side of this. So I think maybe where it might be helpful to start is what are you watching or observing or kind of poking around with when it comes to AI in educational spaces, kind of assistance for students, educational institutions like our state universities? What is the thinking right now in terms of kind of pushing it out to those institutions, which might not be as straightforward as, someone answering a constituent request with, a highway question, but whether or not students are using it in classrooms or professors are supposed to be using it or schools are using it for curriculum or applications, that sort of thing.
Sure. So you're familiar, of course, with Boston just recently rolling out their program where they have a certification. I think that's wonderful. Again, I think foundationally what everybody can do to help everybody learn from it, I think really will help its use. There's a lot of fear associated with AI, and I think the way that you respond to fear really is to learn about it. I really don't like flying, but I've learned more about flying. I've learned more about being able to fly, and it's allowed me to do this job essentially and do all the flights that I have to do. I think the same thing with AI. If people can learn about it, they can learn things that they should be concerned about. If you're on a public AI system, you should not be sharing your data, period. Like it will go into the model and it's possible it will come out again. Um, and so I think really we're seeking to ensure that everybody can have a common understanding of what AI, the good things about AI and the risk with AI. And foundationally, that's where we're coming at it from a training perspective.
And so you might be limited in what you could kind of tell me about this, but as folks have been playing around on the sandbox, as people have kind of been experimenting here, have there been kind of any red flags or green flags that have been interesting that have kind of had to be dealt with tactically or encouraged, either in terms of security or in kind of unintended or unexpected usage?
So we haven't had any examples of security breakdowns. Again, I think our security story is very positive. We have had questions about, what if I accidentally enter sensitive data onto it? What happens? And the good news on that is because it pretty much remains there. Um, so our guidance would be, well, to delete it, and then within 30 days it'll be gone. And it won't go anywhere. So it really does. I think that's an area where we feel we have a solid approach. There are examples of bias. You know, I, my deputy secretary, Erica Bradshaw, she was the chief technology officer at Harvard prior, and she had used an older model, but she had used a model where she had said, "Show me what a higher ed chief technology officer looks like," and it was all men. So sure, here she is. She's the female CTO for Harvard, one of the most prestigious universities in the world, and it wasn't recognized that that would be a possibility, that you could have a female CTO. So I think there's things like that. That's why that human at the helm is so critical. You need to review it. You need to take ownership and not just simply accept it.
That is really, I think, kind of a fascinating pivot into the labor and workforce and human side of this as well, which is, you know, are there skills that the state is sort of hoping that people won't have a grasp on, or others that they, really want to kind of double down on? The idea essentially of, as you're reducing overhead, as you're kind of making things more efficient, some of the trade-off might be, that people don't necessarily learn the skills if they're kind of used to offloading it onto a more sophisticated AI tool. I'm kind of curious about how you're thinking about the core value of, a state employee if they are also using an AI tool.
Sure. So we've been working with labor since we started. We had many early meetings even prior to any announcement of what we were doing. And our focus, all this entire focus is about uh, really educating and helping our workforce. Uh, the example I like to use when I think about this goes all the way back to 1980 and the ATM machine. So if you think about it, the ATM machine comes out and immediately everybody recognizes, well, that just will get rid of bank tellers. And there were articles from back then that call out, 75, 80%, all of these bank tellers are going to be losing their jobs. And there were banks even at the time that they bought into it. They're like, okay, great, we're going to get rid of the bank tellers. Well, what really happened, the ATMs came in and they're very good at taking money in and providing money out, but nothing really else. And so the bank tellers' jobs changed. They did a far less of the money in and money out, but they did a lot more different things related to the bank business itself. And I think the same thing applies to AI, where there will be certain tasks, like say if you spend a lot of time creating templates for things. Well, AI can generate a template just as quickly as you can. You can just, ask for a template, it'll come up immediately. So maybe that part of your time will be reduced. But the demand for all the work on state services is so great. So you do less of that. That allows us to do these other things that provide more value to the constituents of Massachusetts.
So one of the things that has been interesting to me over, the past few months or so, particularly around OpenAI, is the way that there was kind of a dust up with Anthropic and the federal government, where Anthropic had concerns about the way that its technology might be used, specifically by the Pentagon in military situations or surveillance situations. OpenAI, who says it has some of the same red lines, is now in a partnership with the Pentagon. I suppose I'm curious, in a period of time where the state is kind of laser focused on how do you kind of protect Massachusetts from what several politicians in Massachusetts believe is an overreach from the federal government specifically into its data, into kind of monitoring people. How can you kind of be sure that this private institution, respects sort of the rules of Massachusetts? I understand the contractual side of it, but, are there technical security preventions in place?
So yeah, our governor has been very clear about her opinion of the Trump administration and their abuses of power, but none of this has anything to do with like our AI assistant. And so what we have done, we have strong data privacy protections in place. We have security components in place to ensure that our data remains safe within Massachusetts. And I go back to contractual obligation. If this data were to leave, it would be bad for OpenAI, right? It would be a public embarrassment. And our data is prohibited from being used to train AI models. And it's not accessible by other ChatGPT users. It's not accessible by even other ChatGPT users, in the same office. Our data is protected. And again, we continually are doing testing of that, validation of that, and we're not seeing any issues with that.
During the budget hearings, you mentioned kind of the general state of basically testing Massachusetts security systems. That we do, of course, get targeted by people who are trying to get into the state systems. There are processes in place for dealing with that. Are those different in any way when it comes to kind of accessing the infrastructure that now includes AI tools or not?
we have a holistic approach with a zero trust focus across all of Massachusetts infrastructure, including AI tools. Um, Cybersecurity is really important. You may be familiar, Nevada, just 6 months ago, all of their state services were all brought down by a cyber attack. It is very real. The attacks happen regularly, and we've been very fortunate to protect Massachusetts. We'll continue to do that and invest in improving our cybersecurity maturity to meet the attack.
I'd love to take a second and kind of run through sort of the different ways that AI is being used and is kind of facilitating different parts of state government right now. We've talked about kind of the highway project, talking about the AI assistant. Where else are people seeing it pop up? What other kinds of partnerships are worth sort of highlighting here?
So one of the primary areas we're seeing it is anywhere where there's lots of data that needs to be synthesized, that needs a summary. It's really, really good at that. So we're seeing it in things like grants management, where we have all kinds of information, contracts, the creation of contracts. We're seeing things like that where you can come in, you're like, I need a summary of this, I need an assessment of this. Um, it's very good at that kind of thing. And that primarily is where we're seeing a lot of its use. We're seeing a lot of chatbot usage. So these are little helpers that you see. The RMV actually uses an AI chatbot in Massachusetts, and they saw their complaints plummet since the implementation of that. Because again, a lot of common questions, and instead of having to contact somebody at RMV, you can very quickly just ask these very common questions. I want to get a license. What do I do? It knows how to do that. It'll give you an immediate response.
And I think the sort of immediate thing that comes to mind on that front is that bias question that you brought up earlier. That situation of if there's grant summaries, if there's reviewing customer complaints, if it's making recommendations, what is the process inside the state right now for kind of tooling and refining those recommendations to kind of make sure that you're not maybe getting suggestions or summaries of grants that might, demonstrate some sort of implicit bias that we wouldn't want in there.
So it does start with the training, where we ensure that again that human at the helm. So in all cases, you validate what's coming back. You're using it to provide a summary. You're using it to point out some things, but you're also validating it, and that's part of our training. Like our training just isn't simple technical training. Like here's how to write a prompt. We have many tiers of training, including one that I like is we have training for managers that are now managing employees that are using AI. That's something that's fairly unique. You don't hear about that anywhere. But as a manager, suddenly you have somebody who's writing completely differently than they used to before because of AI assisting them in what they're trying to, their ideas that they're trying to provide to you. And so I think foundationally it starts with training users to recognize that AI may introduce errors, and you should review it and you should validate it and make sure that it's good for you.
So I think to kind of end on the broader philosophical level here, what is the driver inside state government right now to kind of push either AI tools or just broader technological advancements kind of through a notoriously slow and unwieldy state system? Anyone that kind of interacts with any state website on a regular basis can usually see that there's some room for improvement. But where are kind of the problems being identified, and what's sort of the decision making process when something like this gets proposed and rolled out? Who says I think we should do an AI assistant, and who says let's kick the tires on that, and who says sure, go for it?
So, I mean, this administration is really focused on the importance of innovation, and the importance of the way innovation can help solve real problems. And so, I think from the highest level down, there's active support for doing something like this, where we can again really help our constituents get the services that they deserve. And I think we're looking at different innovative ideas like AI that can really help. This is not something where sort of, oh, we've always done it this way, and then we expect some kind of different outcome. So I think we are on many different fronts looking at how innovation can really improve Massachusetts.
So thinking about, the standing influence and recommendations from the AI task force and upcoming work from and continuing work from the sort of artificial intelligence council here, what are sort of next projects, next steps? Are there any things that folks are looking into that we might expect to see kind of coming across our plates that aren't in place yet?
So the continued rollout of of AI across Massachusetts. That's what's going to be happening. There's tremendous opportunity for IT modernization, accessibility, meaning that providing applications that everybody has access to is super critical. Well, that's an IT modernization problem statement. And so we have many, many, many years of, hundreds and thousands of old applications that are not accessible. Well, AI can help that. AI can help deliver more applications that are up to date and that actually can meet people where they are. Um, and that's what I see happening, that a broader focus on IT modernization across Massachusetts. You mentioned the websites earlier that you can see room for improvement. Well, the way we get that room for improvement is through using things to help us do all that work. The demand for work that we have in Massachusetts in the IT space, is infinite. And so any tool that can help us get more things done, I think ultimately helps everybody in Massachusetts.
Secretary Snyder, thank you so much for joining me on the Codcast.
Thank you, Jennifer. I really appreciate the discussion.
Thanks again to Secretary Snyder for joining me on the Codcast. Thank you for listening. I'm Jennifer Smith. Our production and theme music is by Charlie Cazella. Leave a rating and review wherever you're hearing this now if you want to help other folks find us, and email codcast@commonwealthbeacon.org if you ever want to get in touch directly. We'll be back next week.